I was 23 when I first laid eyes on the cabin. My friends and I had been planning this weekend getaway for months, eager to escape the chaos of our lives and find a little solace in nature. We drove for hours into the mountains, the trees thickening around us, the air crisp and cool. As we pulled up to the cabin, I could hardly contain my excitement. It was a quaint little structure, nestled in a clearing, with smoke curling from the chimney. Little did I know that the place was steeped in dark history. As we unloaded our bags, I noticed a strange silence surrounding the cabin. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant chirping of birds. My friends were oblivious, laughing and joking as they headed inside. I hesitated for a moment, feeling an inexplicable chill run down my spine. "Get in here," shouted Jake, breaking my trance. I shrugged it off and stepped inside. The interior was cozy, wooden beams overhead, a large stone fireplace, and rustic furniture that seemed to invite us to relax. We unpacked, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, we lit a fire and settled in with snacks and drinks. The atmosphere was electric with laughter, but I couldn't shake that nagging feeling that we weren't alone. The shadows seemed to dance just out of reach of the flickering firelight. After a few drinks, we decided to share ghost stories. It was just a game, right? We laughed about old legends and urban myths, but when it was my turn, I felt compelled to share something more personal. I recounted a tale about a cabin similar to this one, where a group of friends had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. No one ever found out what happened to them. The room grew silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. "Dude, that's messed up," Lisa exclaimed, breaking the tension. "You really think we're in danger?" "Of course not," I chuckled, though a part of me wondered. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m., the cabin eerily silent. The fire had died down, leaving only a faint glow. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves outside, and I felt an overwhelming urge to check the front porch. I slipped on my jacket, trying to shake off the feeling of dread clinging to me like a wet blanket. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face like a slap. I scanned the darkness, that feeling as if I were being watched. Suddenly, I heard a low whisper. "Help me." It was a faint, mournful sound, barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I turned, searching for the source. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice echoed into the night, swallowed by the trees. I waited, breath held, but all I heard was the wind rustling through the branches. Shivering, I turned to head back inside when I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. There, near the edge of the tree line, was a figure. A woman, pale and gaunt, her long hair hanging in tattered strands. She was staring directly at me, her eyes hollow and dark. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, tripping over the porch step and falling hard onto the wooden boards. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and when I looked again, she was gone. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me. "What's wrong?" Jake asked, groggy and confused. "I saw something," I stammered, trying to catch my breath. My friends exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from concern to skepticism. "You probably just had a bad dream," Lisa said dismissively. I wanted to argue, to convince them I wasn't imagining things, but the moment felt too fragile. The next morning, I could hardly shake the feeling of unease. I told myself it was just a figment of my imagination, the product of too many ghost stories and too little sleep. We spent the day hiking and exploring the nearby woods, but as night fell again, the dread returned. Around the campfire that night, we joked and laughed, but I could see the tension in my friends' eyes. I decided to push my fear aside and suggested we do something fun, like a game of truth or dare. We were about to start when the lights flickered in the cabin, then went out entirely, plunging us into darkness. "Great," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just what we need. A horror movie moment." We all chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I suggested we check the generator, and we all reluctantly agreed. Armed with flashlights, we stepped outside again, the cold air biting at our skin. We reached the generator, but it was quiet. No humming, no flicker of light. I turned to my friends, ready to make a joke, but their faces were pale, eyes wide. They were staring at something behind me. I turned, and there she was again, the woman from the night before, standing just at the edge of the light. This time, she was closer. I could see her features clearly. Gaunt cheeks, sunken eyes, and a mouth that twisted into an agonizing grimace. "Help me," she moaned, reaching out a skeletal hand. Fear gripped me, and I turned to run back into the cabin, but my friends were frozen, rooted to the spot. "We need to go." I shouted, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him along. The others followed, and we barreled through the door, slamming it shut behind us. We huddled together, breathless, hearts pounding. "What the hell was that?" Lisa gasped. I glanced around, realizing something was wrong. Way too quiet. "Where's Mia?" My stomach dropped as we scanned the cabin, panic rising. "She was right behind us," Jake shouted. I bolted for the door, ready to go back outside, but before I could turn the knob, a loud bang echoed through the cabin, shaking the walls. "Stay inside," Jake yelled. "We can't leave her out there." But I couldn't just stand there while she was alone. I pushed past him and flung the door open. "Mia," I called, stepping outside into the darkness. The air felt heavier, oppressive. I shone my flashlight in every direction, but all I could see was the suffocating blackness. The wind howled through the trees, drowning out any sound of life. "Help me." The voice was closer now, the woman's figure emerging from the shadows. I could see Mia behind her, pale and frightened. "Get away from her," I screamed, rushing forward, but the woman raised her hand and Mia went still, her eyes glazed over. In that moment, I realized what I had to do. The stories, the legends, all spoke of a choice, a sacrifice to appease the restless spirits of the cabin. "I'll help you," I shouted at the apparition, my heart racing. "Just let her go." The woman's face twisted, her eyes locking onto mine. "Help me," she whispered again, and as if entranced, I stepped forward. The last thing I remember was a cold grip around my wrist, dragging me into the darkness. Now, I wander these woods, my voice echoing in the silence, a whisper in the wind. I am the one who helps, but at a cost. And if you ever find yourself in that cabin, remember to leave before the sun sets, or the woods will claim you too.
Story number 2.
I never thought I'd end up in a cabin in the woods for my summer break, but here I was, sitting in the backseat of my friend Mark's car, watching trees blur by outside the window. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway for us and a few friends, just a break from our busy lives, a chance to reconnect. But something in the pit of my stomach twisted as we approached the secluded cabin. It felt wrong, like we were driving deeper into a shadow. "Are you guys excited?" Mark asked, glancing back at us with a grin that was more unnerving than comforting. "Yeah, totally," I replied, forcing a smile. Beside me, Jenna looked just as apprehensive. She caught my eye and shrugged, her eyes wide, as if sensing the strange energy around us. When we arrived, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. The cabin itself was a ramshackle wooden structure, its paint peeling and windows clouded with dust. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, but Mark laughed it off, insisting it added to the charm. We unloaded our bags and set up inside. The cabin was cramped and dimly lit, with a few dusty old furniture pieces scattered around. There was a musty smell that reminded me of damp earth and something sweetly decayed. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that gripped me as we settled in, but it lingered, hovering like a dark cloud. That first night, we played games and told stories, laughter echoing off the cabin walls, but as the evening wore on, the stories turned darker, delving into local legends and ghost tales. Mark, who loved to scare us, told us about the cabin's history, how it had once belonged to a family that mysteriously vanished one night. No one ever found them, but locals claimed they could still hear their screams echoing through the trees. "Come on, that's just a story," I scoffed, though my voice trembled slightly. Jenna shot me a look, her expression a mix of fear and intrigue. "Maybe we should just go to bed," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark rolled his eyes but relented. We decided to call it a night. I crawled into the small bed I'd claimed, the rough sheets scratching against my skin. I closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The weight of the cabin pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Every creak of the wood sent jolts of fear racing through me. At some point during the night, I woke up to a sound, a faint whispering that seemed to float through the air like smoke. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear better. It was soft and unintelligible, like a conversation happening just outside the window. I glanced around. The others were sound asleep. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. The whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Just as I was about to lie back down, I saw a shadow flit past the window. It moved quickly, too quickly for any person. My heart raced as I scrambled out of bed, peering through the dusty glass. The moon illuminated the woods outside, revealing nothing but trees swaying gently in the breeze. "Just my imagination," I muttered, trying to convince myself. But the sense of unease returned, stronger this time. Morning came, but the strange feeling persisted. Over breakfast, I shared my experience, but Mark laughed it off. You were probably dreaming. This place gets to your head. We spent the day hiking and exploring the area, but the cabin loomed behind us like a watchful sentinel. That evening, we decided to have a bonfire outside, roasting marshmallows and telling more stories. But as the fire crackled and popped, the whispers returned, weaving through the sound of laughter. "Did you hear that?" Jenna asked, her voice quivering. "Hear what?" Mark replied, but the humor in his voice was wavering. "Those whispers, it's like someone is trying to talk to us," Jenna insisted, her eyes darting to the trees. "Stop it," I said, trying to sound tough, but I felt it too, a presence lurking just beyond the flickering light of the fire. As the night deepened, we retreated into the cabin, the shadows lengthening and the air growing colder. I took the top bunk, while Jenna and Mark shared the bottom. I lay there, staring up at the wooden beams, trying to dismiss the chill creeping into my bones. In the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. My heart raced as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. "Mark? Jenna?" I called, but my voice was swallowed by the dark silence. I climbed down carefully, my feet barely making a sound on the floorboards. As I crept toward the door, I felt an unnatural draft that seemed to beckon me outside. With each step, a whisper echoed in my mind. "Come outside. Come see." I opened the door, the cool night air hitting me like a wave. The moon was bright, illuminating the clearing around the cabin. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure standing just beyond the fire pit, shrouded in shadows. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound brave. The figure turned, its face hidden, but I felt its eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. "Come," it whispered, voice like rustling leaves. Fear surged through me, and I stumbled backward. "No, I don't want to," I shouted, but it took a step closer, and I felt an overwhelming urge to move toward it. I turned and ran back into the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I shook Mark and Jenna awake. "What's wrong?" Jenna mumbled, bleary-eyed. Someone is outside," I gasped, still trembling. Mark leapt out of bed, his earlier bravado gone. "What do you mean?" "It's out there. I saw it," I insisted, my voice rising in panic. Mark hurried to the window, peering out into the darkness. "I don't see anything," he said, his voice shaky. Just then, a knock echoed from the door. My blood ran cold. "Let me in," the whisper called, so similar to the figure outside. "No," I screamed, backing away. "Who is it?" Mark asked, his bravado fading. "I don't know," I shouted, but the whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling the room. "Let me in." It beckoned again, and I felt the walls closing in. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the cabin shook as if a strong wind had hit it. The door rattled violently, and the windows shook. "We need to leave," Jenna screamed, her eyes wide with terror. We rushed to gather our things, the air heavy with dread. As we stumbled outside, I glanced back at the cabin, and in the dim light, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its face obscured, but I could feel its gaze boring into my soul. We ran into the woods, the whispers chasing us, echoing through the trees, and I knew we could never return. We didn't stop until we reached the road, collapsing in the dirt, gasping for breath. The whispers faded, but the weight of the cabin pressed on my chest, a reminder of the horror that lingered within those walls. I glanced back at the dark silhouette of the cabin, a ghostly presence nestled in the trees, knowing it would never let go of its secrets. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The car's tires crunched over the gravel as I pulled into the clearing, the cabin coming into view between the trees. This wasn't my idea, but when my buddy Tom suggested a weekend away from the city, I thought, why not? Little did I know that I would regret my decision the moment we arrived. The cabin stood alone, framed by tall pines, the sun casting long shadows over its weathered facade. It looked ancient, like something out of a horror movie. "Nice place, right?" Tom said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, real cozy," I muttered, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. Inside, the cabin was dark, filled with old furniture that seemed to creak under the weight of memories. A faint smell of mildew hung in the air, and dust particles danced in the thin beams of light that broke through the grimy windows. I could feel the energy of the place wrapping around me. Heavy and oppressive. "We should explore a bit," Tom suggested, his enthusiasm infectious despite my apprehension. We wandered outside, discovering a small trail leading into the woods. "Let's see where this goes," Tom urged, excitement bubbling in his voice. I followed reluctantly, every step deeper into the woods heightening my unease. As we hiked, the trees loomed like sentinels, their branches intertwining above us, blocking out the sun. I could hear rustling in the underbrush, and the silence felt too loud, too watchful. "You ever feel like we're being watched?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder. Tom chuckled. "You're just being paranoid. It's just the woods." But I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like 1,000 eyes were peering from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. We made our way back to the cabin as the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. That night, we settled in for a few rounds of cards, the cabin illuminated only by the flickering flames of the fireplace. As I shuffled the deck, I heard something, soft, almost like whispering. I paused, straining to listen. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Tom waved his hand dismissively. "It's just the wind. Old cabins make weird noises." But the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like an invisible fog. They echoed through the walls, a faint cacophony of voices pleading and laughing, beckoning us to join them. "Seriously, man, do you hear that?" I pressed, feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "Stop it," Tom said, frowning. "You're freaking me out." I tried to brush it off, focusing on the game, but my mind kept drifting back to the whispers. They seemed to call my name, drawing me closer to the walls. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced toward the dark corners of the room, shadows pooling ominously. "Let's take a break," I suggested, rising from the table. Tom nodded, looking uneasy. I stepped outside for some fresh air, the cool breeze brushing against my face. The woods felt alive, rustling with unseen creatures. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension, when I heard it again, a whisper, clearer this time, coming from the direction of the trees. "Come, join us," it beckoned, voice soft yet demanding. My heart raced, and I stumbled back, almost tripping over a root. "Tom!" I shouted, my voice breaking the stillness. He rushed outside, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" I heard it again. "It's coming from the woods." I pointed, dread pooling in my stomach. "Let's just go back inside," he suggested, glancing nervously into the darkness. We hurried back to the cabin, locking the door behind us. As we sat in silence, the whispers intensified, now a chorus of haunting voices that seemed to resonate through the very walls. "They want us," I murmured, fear clawing at my insides. "Stop it," Tom snapped, trying to shake off his own rising panic. But the whispers wouldn't stop, swirling around us, becoming more frantic. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to drown out the sound, but it was no use. Suddenly, the cabin shook, and a gust of wind burst through the room, extinguishing the fire. Darkness enveloped us, and I could hear Tom's breathing quicken beside me. "Let's get out of here," he shouted, but the door wouldn't budge, as if something was holding it shut. Panic surged through me, and I pushed against it, but it was futile. "We're trapped," I screamed. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. "We need to find another way." We bolted toward a window, but the shadows outside twisted and writhed, blocking our escape. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of figures, silhouettes standing among the trees, their faces obscured but their eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. "They're here!" I yelled, terror gripping my heart. Tom turned pale. "We have to fight them off." He grabbed a nearby poker from the fireplace, brandishing it like a weapon. We backed away from the window, hearts pounding, adrenaline coursing through our veins. "What do we do?" I cried, desperately scanning the room for anything that could help. As if sensing our fear, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, crashing against us like waves. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, and in that moment the shadows crept closer, slipping through the cracks of our sanity. Tom lunged for the door again, throwing his weight against it. "Get it open," I screamed, pushing beside him. Finally, the door creaked open, and we stumbled out into the night. But the woods were alive with movement. The shadows surged toward us, reaching out with elongated fingers, whispering our names. I could see their faces now, twisted, anguished, forever trapped in this realm between the living and the dead. "Run!" I yelled, and we dashed into the forest, branches tearing at our clothes, the ground uneven beneath our feet. The whispers followed, echoing in our minds, clawing at our sanity. We ran and ran, not stopping until we reached the car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, praying the engine would start. The whispers grew louder, desperate, their voices mingling with our own cries for escape. Finally, the engine roared to life, and we peeled away from the cabin, the shadows receding into the darkness. I glanced back through the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment I swore I saw the figures standing by the cabin, their mouths twisted in silent screams. As we drove into the night, the whispers faded into the distance, but the weight of the cabin pressed on my chest, a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed, hidden away in the shadows. Story, the end.
Story number 10.
It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, just my best friends and me, a chance to reconnect and recharge. We found a rustic cabin in the woods, miles from civilization, and after a long drive filled with laughter and music, we finally arrived. The cabin was quaint, surrounded by towering pines that whispered secrets in the wind. I felt an instant sense of peace wash over me as we unloaded our bags, but deep down, a whisper of unease slithered through my mind. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. We settled in, lit a fire, and started reminiscing about our childhood adventures. The flames crackled and danced, creating shadows that seemed to flicker around the walls. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost tangible. I noticed a peculiar painting hanging above the fireplace, an abstract depiction of a woman, her eyes eerily lifelike, following us wherever we moved. "Who painted this?" I asked, breaking the spell of laughter. "I found it in the attic," said Mark, one of my friends. "The owner left it behind. Creepy, right?" "Definitely creepy," I replied, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. As night fell, we played games, drank, and laughed. But soon the fun turned to a game of truth or dare. I dared Sarah to tell a ghost story, and as she spoke, I could feel the weight of the cabin pressing down on us. She recounted an old legend about a woman who had lived in these woods, betrayed by her friends and left to die alone. They said her spirit still lingered, haunting anyone who dared to enter the cabin. "Stop it! You're scaring me," Lisa said, half joking, but I could see the fear creeping into her eyes. "Come on, it's just a story." I laughed, trying to shake off the tension, but the room fell silent, and a strange unease settled over us. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped outside for some fresh air, hoping to clear my mind. The night was eerily still, the moon casting a silvery glow over the cabin. I took a deep breath, but the chill of the air sent shivers down my spine. As I turned to head back inside, I thought I heard a soft whisper, barely audible. "Help me." I paused, heart racing, scanning the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, but only the wind answered. Shaking my head, I dismissed it as my imagination and hurried back inside. When I entered, I noticed my friends were acting strangely. They were gathered in a tight circle, whispering urgently. "What's going on?" I asked. "Nothing," Mark replied too quickly, and I felt a wave of suspicion wash over me. "Just talking." I shrugged it off and joined them, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. As the night wore on, we decided to turn in. I crawled into my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the unease settling in my stomach. I drifted off, but sleep was restless. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by soft whispers echoing through the cabin. I opened my eyes to see flickering shadows dancing on the walls. My heart raced as I realized my friends were still asleep, their breathing steady and deep. The whispers grew louder, and a cold draft swept through the room, sending chills down my spine. "Help me." This time, it was clear, a voice filled with despair and longing. I sat up, trembling, and looked around, but the cabin was empty of any visible presence. The only sound was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Summoning my courage, I crept out of my sleeping bag and tiptoed toward the door. As I stepped outside, the moonlight illuminated the clearing, casting long shadows that stretched toward the trees. The whispers intensified, guiding me deeper into the woods. "Help me." It was a plea that pulled at my heart. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. The trees loomed over me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The whispers led me further until I reached a clearing. There I saw her, the woman from the painting, standing under the moonlight, her long hair flowing like mist. Her eyes, once hauntingly lifelike, now glimmered with a sorrow that pierced through me. "Help me," she whispered again, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They betrayed me," she said, her voice a soft wail. "They left me to die. You must help me find peace." The weight of her sorrow bore down on me, and I felt compelled to assist her. "What do I need to do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Bring them here," she replied, pointing toward the cabin. "Make them understand." I hesitated, fear flooding my mind. I could feel the darkness surrounding me, creeping closer, but I thought of my friends, their laughter, their memories, and a sudden resolve washed over me. I nodded. "I will help you." I turned and raced back to the cabin, my heart pounding. I burst through the door, startling my friends awake. "We have to go back into the woods," I cried. "What? Are you crazy?" Sarah exclaimed, looking at me like I was losing my mind. "There's a woman, a spirit. She needs us." I gasped, pleading with them. "She was betrayed, just like in the story. We can't leave her." The room fell silent, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. "This is ridiculous," Mark said. "You're just tired. We should go back to sleep." "No," I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "We have to help her. We can't ignore this." After a moment of hesitation, I managed to convince them to follow me back into the woods. The darkness seemed to thicken around us as we walked, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. I led them to the clearing where I had first encountered the spirit, but as we reached it, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You brought them," the woman said, her voice echoing through the trees. I turned to my friends, desperation etched on their faces. "We're here to help," I called out, stepping forward. "Tell us what we can do." The woman's expression twisted in pain, and I could feel the air grow colder. "They betrayed me. They must understand their sins." Before I could react, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, knocking us off our feet. Shadows swirled around us, and I felt an unseen force pushing against me. "What is happening?" Lisa screamed, scrambling to get back on her feet. "Stay together," I shouted, trying to hold on to them as the shadows closed in. The woman's wail echoed through the clearing, and in that moment the darkness surged, wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. "Help me," she cried again, but this time it felt like a command. Suddenly, I understood. This was not a plea for help, it was a demand. We were the ones who had to face our own betrayals, our own fears. The cabin wasn't just a retreat, it was a trap, a vessel for the spirit's pain. "Get out!" I screamed, grabbing my friends and pulling them toward the path. The shadows thrashed around us, but we broke free, sprinting back to the cabin. We slammed the door shut behind us, panting and shaking. "What the hell just happened?" Mark gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "We have to leave. Now!" I urged, but a loud crash echoed from outside and the air felt electric. The whispers intensified, swirling around us like a storm. "No," Sarah cried, her face pale. "We can't go back out there. We have to face it," I insisted. "We can't let it consume us." We stood together, hearts racing as the whispers grew louder, drowning out our thoughts. "Help me." The voice was stronger now, more insistent. With shaking hands, I reached for the door, ready to confront whatever waited outside. But just as I opened it, a gust of wind slammed it shut, throwing me backward. "Let go of her!" I yelled, feeling a surge of anger. The cabin shook, and in that moment I realized we were not just fighting a spirit. We were battling the darkness within ourselves. I looked at my friends, fear giving way to determination. "We can't let her win. We have to stand together," I shouted. In a moment of unity, we joined hands, and I felt a warmth radiate from each of us. The whispers turned into a cacophony, but we stood firm, channeling our courage into one collective shout. "You will not take us." The shadows writhed and twisted, colliding with the energy of our voices. The temperature dropped, and for a fleeting moment, the woman appeared again, but her expression shifted from anger to sorrow. "Help me," she pleaded, and we felt the weight of her pain wash over us. In that instant, I understood. We needed to forgive her, to acknowledge her pain, to help her find peace. "We forgive you," I shouted, my voice breaking. "You are not alone anymore." The wind howled, and the shadows recoiled as if struck.
Story number 5.
It was supposed to be a weekend of adventure, a much-needed escape from the grind of city life. My friends and I had booked a rustic cabin in the woods of Pine Ridge, an area known for its breathtaking views and serene trails. As we pulled up the winding gravel road, excitement bubbled among us. But the moment we arrived, a sense of dread settled over me. The cabin was nestled deep among the trees, its wooden frame weathered and worn. It loomed before us, almost like a living thing, its windows dark and uninviting. "What do you think?" Ryan, the ever-enthusiastic one in our group, asked, beaming with excitement. "It looks rustic," I replied, forcing a smile despite the chill that ran down my spine. Inside, the cabin felt different, alive, almost as if it had its own pulse. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something sour. The rooms were dimly lit, and the fireplace looked like it hadn't been used in years. Dust motes floated in the air, shimmering in the weak light. "Let's explore," Ryan suggested, already heading for the stairs. I hesitated but followed the others as they climbed to the second floor. The narrow hallway was lined with closed doors, each one like a secret waiting to be uncovered. "Check this out," said Leah, one of our friends, opening a door at the end of the hall. The room was empty except for a faded rocking chair that swayed gently, though no wind stirred. "Creepy," she whispered, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. As I stepped inside, I felt an unsettling presence wash over me. I shivered, backing away. Let's not linger here too long, I said, trying to lighten the mood. But my friends laughed it off, teasing me for being overly cautious. After unpacking and settling in, we decided to make a fire outside. The night sky was clear, stars twinkling like distant eyes watching us. As we roasted marshmallows, the atmosphere turned jovial, laughter echoing through the woods. But as the flames flickered, I felt the shadows around us deepening, stretching like fingers reaching out. Let's tell ghost stories, Ryan suggested, his face illuminated by the firelight. The others cheered, and soon we were sharing tales of urban legends and haunted places. I watched the flames dance, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach as we laughed about the supernatural. Then Leah told a story about a family that had lived in this very cabin years ago, a family that had mysteriously vanished one winter night. They say their spirits still roam the woods looking for a way back home, she said, her voice low and eerie. Come on, that's just a story, I said, trying to dismiss the unease creeping back into my mind. But the night grew colder, and the wind whispered through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. Later that night, after the fire had burned low, we retreated inside. As I climbed into bed, I felt restless, the whispers of the woods still echoing in my ears. Sleep came reluctantly, but the night was restless. I woke to the sound of creaking wood, the cabin groaning like it was alive. My heart raced as I lay still, straining to listen. The creaking was accompanied by a soft whispering, like voices filtering through the walls. I sat up, wide-eyed, and looked around. My friends were all asleep, their faces peaceful, unaware of the disturbance. Hello? I called, my voice shaking. There was no response, just the faint whispers continuing, weaving through the darkness. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cold wooden floor against my feet. I tiptoed to the door, hesitating for a moment. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Come, join us. They seemed to beckon. Against my better judgment, I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The cabin felt even colder now, a chill wrapping around me. I moved slowly, drawn by the whispers toward the room Leah had opened earlier. As I reached for the doorknob, a sudden crash echoed from downstairs, sending shockwaves of terror through me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. I turned to run back to my friends when I heard it again. This time, a low, mournful wail that seemed to seep from the very walls of the cabin. Guys, wake up! I yelled, pounding on the door to the room where my friends slept. Something's wrong. The door swung open, and Ryan stepped out, his eyes bleary and confused. What is it? I heard something downstairs, I exclaimed, trembling. Leah and another friend, Mark, joined us, looking concerned. What kind of something? Leah asked, her voice steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. I don't know. It sounded like a scream, I stammered, glancing toward the stairs, the shadows creeping along the walls. Let's check it out, Ryan said, trying to sound brave, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. We crept down the stairs, the darkness wrapping around us like a thick fog. The whispers intensified, filling the air with a desperate urgency. Come, join us. When we reached the living room, the fireplace was cold and dark, but a strange, flickering light pulsed from the back of the cabin. What is that? Mark asked, pointing. We moved cautiously toward the light, my heart racing as the whispers turned into anguished cries. They echoed off the walls, the sound rising to a fever pitch as we reached the source, a small door hidden behind a tattered curtain. Should we open it? Leah whispered, fear and curiosity mingling in her voice. We have to, Ryan said, his determination palpable. He reached for the handle, and as he turned it, the door swung open with an eerie creak. Inside was a small cellar, damp and dark. The flickering light emanated from a single flickering candle sitting on a dusty table. It illuminated a series of old photographs scattered across the table. We stepped closer, our breath hitching in our throats as we realized they were pictures of the family who had lived there, their faces twisted in terror. Suddenly, the air grew thick with a suffocating presence, and I felt an unseen force push against us. The whispers turned into frantic screams, clawing at our minds. Get out! Get out! Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind us. What the hell? Mark shouted, pounding on the door. Let us out! Leah cried, but the walls closed in, the cabin itself becoming our prison. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, a twisted chorus of agony that filled the air. We need to break down the door. Ryan yelled, but fear gripped us like a vice, paralyzing our movements. Just then, the candle flickered violently, and the shadows came alive, swirling around us like a storm. I could see them now. Figures emerging from the darkness, their faces twisted in eternal sorrow, reaching out with ghostly hands. "No! Stay back!" I screamed, pushing against the others as they stumbled backward. The door rattled violently, and with one final desperate push, it burst open, sending us sprawling into the hallway. We didn't look back as we raced up the stairs, panic driving us forward. As we reached the upper floor, I could hear the whispers trailing behind us, merging with the cries of the trapped souls. "Join us! Join us!" We burst into the nearest bedroom, slamming the door shut and barricading it with furniture. "What do we do?" Leah gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "Call for help," Ryan said, fumbling for his phone. But there was no signal, only a faint, mocking laugh echoing through the walls. I could hear the whispers outside, growing louder, more frantic. "Join us." Suddenly, the door shuddered as something pounded against it, the wooden frame creaking under the pressure. I felt the walls closing in, and I knew we had to escape. "We need to find a window," I shouted, darting toward the nearest one. We threw it open, the cool night air rushing in, but we were high up. "It's too far to jump," Mark exclaimed, looking down at the ground below. "Then we have to find another way," I shouted, glancing back at the door, which was splintering under the force of whatever was trying to get in. With no other option, we climbed out onto the ledge and moved along the outside of the cabin, our hearts racing. The whispers echoed behind us, the voices growing angrier, more desperate. "Come back! Join us!" We reached a window on the lower floor, desperately trying to pry it open. "Help me!" I yelled, and together we forced it open just as the door burst apart behind us. We tumbled inside, gasping for breath as we looked around the room. The air was heavy with despair, the shadows swirling like a living thing. "Go! We need to get out!" Ryan shouted, but as we raced for the front door, I felt a cold grip on my ankle, pulling me back. I screamed, struggling against the invisible force. "No! Let me go!" The others turned, their faces pale with terror. "Help her!" Leah cried, reaching for me, but the shadows were...
Story number 6.
I never should have accepted the invitation to Blackwood Cabin. When my old college roommate, Sarah, texted me about a weekend getaway, I figured it was a perfect chance to reconnect. We hadn't seen each other in years, and the promise of hiking, campfires, and fresh air lured me in. But from the moment I arrived, I sensed that something was off. The cabin was tucked away in a dense forest, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to whisper secrets to each other. Its exterior was quaint, painted a deep forest green, but the windows were grimy, almost as if they hadn't been cleaned in decades. As I stepped inside, a musty smell enveloped me, and I felt a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. "Welcome to my humble abode," Sarah exclaimed, her voice cheerful as she set down her bags. But even her enthusiasm couldn't mask the unsettling atmosphere that lingered in the air. The interior was filled with old furniture, the kind you'd find in a grandmother's house, each piece bearing its own history. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, and I could almost hear it crackling with ghostly whispers. "This place is charming," I said, forcing a smile. "Right? It's got character," Sarah replied, completely unaware of my unease. After unpacking, we decided to explore the surrounding woods. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the trees loomed larger, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick canopy above, casting eerie shadows on the ground. "Is it just me, or does it feel like we're being watched?" I asked, a shiver running down my spine. "Don't be silly, it's just the woods," Sarah laughed, though her eyes darted around, betraying her own uncertainty. That evening, we gathered around the fireplace, the crackling flames illuminating the cabin's dark corners. We shared stories and drank wine, but as the night wore on, an unsettling tension began to build. I glanced at the walls, feeling as if they were closing in on us, suffocating our laughter. "Let's tell ghost stories," Sarah suggested, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I hesitated, but eventually joined in, sharing a tale about a haunted hotel. The more stories we told, the heavier the air became, thick with unspoken fears. Then Sarah began her story, her voice lowering as she recounted local legends about Blackwood Cabin. "They say it's cursed," she said, her eyes wide. "Years ago, a family lived here, but one night, they all vanished without a trace. Some say their spirits still haunt this place, looking for a way back." A chill coursed through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin itself was listening. The shadows flickered as the fire danced, and I felt the temperature drop. "That's just a story to scare people," I said, trying to dismiss the growing fear in my chest. As the night wore on, exhaustion settled in, and we decided to call it a night. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, but sleep eluded me. The wind howled outside, and I could hear the creaking of the cabin like it was alive, groaning under the weight of its own history. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange noise, a soft thumping like footsteps echoing through the cabin. My heart raced as I lay frozen in bed, straining to listen. The thumping continued, growing louder and closer. I slowly sat up, heart pounding, and glanced toward the door. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice trembling. No answer. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feeling the cold floor beneath my feet. I crept to the door, pausing to listen. The thumping had stopped, replaced by a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, cloaked in shadows. I stepped out cautiously, the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The hum grew louder, pulling me toward the living room. I moved forward, every instinct telling me to turn back, but curiosity propelled me. As I entered the living room, the temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the air. The fireplace had gone cold, but the shadows danced, swirling around the room as if they had a life of their own. The humming was now a haunting lullaby, echoing in my mind. "Get out!" The voice seemed to whisper, soft yet urgent. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, and I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through me, and I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows thickened, wrapping around me like tendrils, and the whispers escalated into a cacophony of desperate cries. "Join us! Join us!" I stumbled backward, my heart racing. "Sarah!" I screamed, my voice filled with terror. The cabin seemed to respond to my cries, the walls vibrating as if they were alive. I could feel a presence moving in the darkness, something ancient and angry. "Get out!" I shouted, but the shadows closed in, suffocating me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by shadows. "Help me," she pleaded, her voice a chilling whisper. I froze, paralyzed by fear, but as she reached out, I caught a glimpse of her eyes, filled with sorrow, despair, and a desperate longing. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice echoing with urgency. With a surge of adrenaline, I rushed to the window, throwing it open and climbing out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I hit the ground hard, scrambling to my feet and sprinting into the woods. Branches clawed at my skin as I raced through the trees, the whispers trailing behind me. "Join us! Help us!" they cried. But I didn't stop, fear propelling me forward. I ran until I burst into the clearing, panting and disoriented. The moonlight illuminated the path, and I stumbled toward my car parked at the edge of the forest. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I finally managed to unlock the door. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced back at the cabin, now a dark silhouette against the night sky. The whispers faded, but I could still feel the weight of their despair pressing against me. I started the engine, the sound shattering the silence, and peeled away from the haunted place. Weeks later, I still couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I tried to call Sarah, but her phone went straight to voicemail. It wasn't until I saw the news report that the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The authorities had found Blackwood Cabin abandoned, and Sarah was missing, her last known location marked by the ominous structure deep in the woods. They suspected foul play, but I knew the truth. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was a living entity, a trap for lost souls. The whispers never left me. "Join us," they would say, haunting my dreams and waking hours. I had escaped, but I knew that the cabin would always be waiting, its shadows reaching out for the next unsuspecting visitor, desperate to add to its collection of lost souls. Story the end.
Story number 7.
The winding road through the forest was surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean closer with every turn. My friends and I were excited for the weekend at the cabin, a chance to escape city life, disconnect, and reconnect with nature. The further we drove, the more the outside world faded away, replaced by the whispering wind and rustling leaves. When we finally arrived, the cabin was even more charming than I had imagined. It stood proudly in a clearing built of weathered wood, with a small porch that beckoned us to sit and relax. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Little did I know that tranquility would soon vanish. We unpacked quickly, eager to explore the area. The inside of the cabin was cozy, with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a living room filled with comfortable furniture. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed a rusted sign partially buried in the leaves at the edge of the property. It read, "Beware." the Whispering Pines. I chuckled, dismissing it as a quirky local warning. That evening, we gathered around the fireplace, laughter filling the cabin. We played games, shared stories, and as the night deepened, we began to tell ghost stories. I heard there's a legend about this place, Sarah said, her voice lowering. They say a woman went missing in the woods years ago, and her spirit haunts these pines, searching for something she lost. Classic horror story, I said with a grin, but I felt a shiver run down my spine. Let's not give ourselves nightmares. As the fire crackled, we moved on to lighter topics, but the legend lingered in the back of my mind. Eventually, we turned in for the night, exhaustion from the day's adventures settling in. I fell asleep quickly, but around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a soft rustling outside. I lay still, straining to listen. It sounded like whispers, drifting through the open window, mingling with the wind. "Help me." The voice was faint, almost melodic. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks. But the sound persisted, echoing in my mind, growing louder. "Guys," I whispered, nudging Jake, who was sleeping on the couch. "Did you hear that?" He grumbled and rolled over, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Frustrated, I got up and tiptoed outside, the cool night air hitting me like a splash of ice water. The whispers grew clearer as I stepped off the porch, and I felt a strange compulsion to follow them into the trees. "Help me." The voice called again, guiding me deeper into the woods. I hesitated, looking back at the warm glow of the cabin behind me, but curiosity pulled me forward. I took a few steps, feeling the ground crunch beneath my feet, the whispers surrounding me like a gentle embrace. Suddenly, the trees seemed to shift, blocking my path. I stopped, a sense of dread washing over me. The whispers turned to frantic cries. "Help me, please!" My heart raced as I glanced back at the cabin, torn between fear and the urge to help. "What do you need?" I called out into the darkness. "Find me." The voice echoed, sorrowful and desperate. I hesitated, fear gnawing at my stomach. Just then, a gust of wind rushed through the trees, causing branches to sway violently. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. This was a mistake. I turned to flee back to the cabin, but something caught my eye, a flash of white in the shadows. I squinted, and there she was, a woman in a flowing dress, her long hair cascading down her back. She stood just beyond the trees, pale and ethereal, her eyes wide and filled with sorrow. "Help me," she whispered again, extending her hand toward me. "No," I shouted, stumbling back. "I can't help you." Before I could turn to run, she vanished, replaced by an overwhelming darkness that closed in around me. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted back toward the cabin, the whispers echoing behind me. "Help me! Help me!" I burst through the door, panting and wide-eyed. "Guys, did you see that?" I gasped, but they were still asleep, oblivious to my terror. I locked the door, my heart pounding against my ribs, and sank onto the couch, trying to calm myself. The sun rose slowly, spilling golden light into the cabin. My friends stirred, and I recounted my harrowing encounter. "You should have woken us up," Jake said, rubbing his eyes. "That sounds terrifying." "Let's go for a hike today," Sarah suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "We can explore the woods." I hesitated, remembering the whispers, but I didn't want to ruin the trip. "Sure, why not?" I agreed, forcing a smile. As we hiked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining like gnarled fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers returned, softly weaving through the air. "Help me? Do you guys hear that?" I asked, glancing nervously at my friends. "Hear what?" Mark replied, glancing around, confusion etched on his face. I pressed my lips together, unsure if I should speak up again. As we continued along the trail, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Help me, please." Suddenly, Jake tripped over a root and fell. "Damn it!" he yelled, struggling to get up. "What's wrong with this place?" The moment he stood, a cold breeze swept through the trees, swirling leaves around us. I felt a wave of unease, and the whispers intensified, swirling in a chaotic rhythm. "Help me! Find me!" "Okay, this is getting creepy," Lisa said, glancing nervously at me. "Let's head back." I nodded, desperate to leave this haunted place. As we turned to retrace our steps, I spotted the woman again, her figure standing among the trees, watching us with pleading eyes. "Help me!" she cried, her voice echoing through the woods. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Lisa's hand. We sprinted through the trees, dodging branches and roots. The whispers became a deafening roar, drowning out our screams. "Help me! Help me!" We burst back into the clearing, gasping for breath, but the cabin stood silent. We dashed inside and slammed the door shut, leaning against it as we tried to catch our breath. "What the hell was that?" Mark panted, his face pale. I saw her again, I exclaimed, shaking. The woman from the woods. Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination? Jake asked, looking skeptical. No, she needs help, I insisted, my heart racing. She's trapped here. We stood in the cabin, uncertainty hanging in the air. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, the whispers returned, echoing through the cabin. Help me! No more! Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. We can't keep ignoring this. If she's real, we have to help her. I nodded, fear mingling with determination. Okay, let's go back, but we need to stick together. We ventured back into the woods, following the whispers, which seemed to guide us. My heart raced with every step, but the thought of the woman kept me moving. We reached the clearing again, the moon illuminating the area. The woman stood there, her eyes locking onto mine. You came, she said, relief flooding her voice. What do you want from us? I asked, my voice shaking. I was betrayed, she whispered, her voice trembling. They left me here to die. Who? Who betrayed you? I pressed, feeling the weight of her sorrow. They came for me, she replied, her voice a haunting melody. But I was lost in the woods. I need you to find what was taken from me. What was taken? I asked, desperate for answers. My locket, she said, pointing to the ground. It holds my memories. Without it, I cannot rest. We looked around and I felt compelled to search the area. Okay, we'll help you, I promised. Where should we start? Follow the whispers, she urged, stepping back into the shadows. We began to search the clearing, listening closely for the whispers that seemed to guide us. Help me, they called, weaving through the trees. After several tense moments, Lisa gasped and pointed to a small pile of leaves at the base of a tree. Here, she exclaimed, digging through the leaves. My heart raced as she unearthed a delicate silver locket, glimmering in the moonlight. We huddled around her, and I could feel the weight of its significance. Is this it? I asked, holding it up. The woman nodded, her expression softening. Thank you, she whispered, reaching out her hand. Now I can be free. As I placed the locket in her palm, a warmth radiated through the clearing, and the whispers grew quieter, more peaceful. You've freed me, she said, a serene smile spreading across her face. Thank you. Suddenly, the darkness that had enveloped us began to lift. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight.
Story number 8.
The road to the cabin was a narrow, winding trail, overgrown with weeds and brambles. My friends and I had been looking forward to this weekend retreat for months, an escape from the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. As we drove deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead like ancient guardians. It was picturesque, but a sense of foreboding hung in the air, almost tangible. When we finally reached the cabin, it was everything I had hoped for. It sat nestled in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. The exterior was weathered, the wood gray from years of exposure to the elements. A stone chimney puffed wisps of smoke into the crisp evening air, promising warmth. Inside, the cabin was cozy and inviting, filled with rustic charm. We unpacked quickly, excited to explore. As dusk fell, we gathered around the fireplace, our laughter filling the room. The atmosphere was light, and we soon found ourselves sharing ghost stories, as was tradition. Mark, the bravest of us all, leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Have you guys heard about the lost souls of Ravenwood? I rolled my eyes, half listening. Sounds cliche, but go on. They say there's a cabin deep in these woods, a cabin just like this one, where souls of the damned wander, forever searching for peace. If you hear whispers in the wind, it's them trying to communicate. They want help, but they can't leave the woods. Nice story, Lisa scoffed, but I could see the chill creeping into her expression. I shrugged it off, but a small part of me felt uneasy. Later that night, after a few drinks, we settled into our sleeping bags. The fire crackled softly, lulling us into a false sense of security. Just as I was drifting off, I was jolted awake by a soft whisper. Help me! I sat up, heart racing. I glanced at my friends, who were all fast asleep. Hello? I whispered into the darkness. The cabin was silent, but outside the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the voice with it. Help me. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my imagination. I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispering continued, wrapping around me like a shroud, pulling me into its depths. Finally, I decided I couldn't take it any longer. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and crept outside. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the forest. I walked to the edge of the clearing, peering into the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Help me. Following the sound, I ventured deeper into the woods. The trees closed in around me, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. I called out into the night, "Who's there?" Help me. The voice was close now, a soft plea that tugged at my heartstrings. I pressed on, feeling both terrified and compelled. Where are you? As I walked, I stumbled upon a clearing. At its center stood an ancient, dilapidated cabin that looked remarkably like the one we had rented. The air felt charged, and the whispers intensified, swirling around me. Help me. I stepped closer, the wooden door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and despair. The furniture was old and rotting, and the walls seemed to close in around me. Who are you? I called, my voice trembling. The shadows shifted, and then I saw her, a woman in a tattered dress, her hair hanging in wild tangles. She looked at me with hollow eyes, filled with sorrow. You can help me, she whispered, her voice echoing through the darkness. Help you with what? I asked, stepping back. My soul is trapped here. I need you to find the others, she said, her gaze piercing through me. They were lost before me, but I can lead you to them. I hesitated, fear coursing through me. What do you mean? Who are they? The lost souls, she replied, her voice soft yet urgent. They wander these woods, unable to find peace. If you help me, you can help them too. Before I could respond, a rush of wind swept through the cabin and the woman vanished, leaving behind only an icy chill. I turned to run, but stumbled over a broken floorboard, falling hard to the ground. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to my feet, bolting out of the cabin. I raced back toward our cabin, heart pounding, breathless from fear. I burst through the door, waking my friends. Guys, we need to leave. What's wrong? Mark asked, his voice thick with sleep. I saw her, the woman from the woods. She said we need to help the lost souls. I was shaking now, adrenaline flooding my veins. Calm down, Sarah said, sitting up. You're scaring us. No, you don't understand. The whispers, they're real. We can't stay here, I pleaded, but their expressions shifted from concern to skepticism. Let's just get some sleep, Jake said dismissively, rolling over. You're just tired. I wanted to scream to make them understand, but instead I felt the weight of despair settle over me. The whispers grew faint as I lay back down, anxiety coiling in my chest. Eventually, exhaustion took hold, and I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke to an unsettling silence. My friends were already up, but something felt off. The air was thick, and the cabin seemed dimmer, shadows lingering in the corners. Let's hike, Mark suggested, and though I hesitated, I didn't want to stay cooped up inside. We set off into the woods, the sun filtering through the trees, casting dancing patterns on the ground. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers returned, barely audible but unmistakable. Help me! Do you guys hear that? I asked, glancing at my friends, but they shook their heads, oblivious to the sound. I tried to focus on the trail ahead, but the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Help me! Help us! Suddenly, Lisa stopped, her face pale. What's happening? Why do I feel so strange? Something isn't right, I muttered, glancing around. The trees seemed to close in, their branches stretching out like claws. We need to go back. But before we could turn, the shadows shifted around us and figures emerged from the trees. Ghostly apparitions, their faces twisted in pain and sorrow, surrounded us. I recognized the woman from my dreams, her eyes pleading. Help us! Screams erupted from my friends as the apparitions moved closer, their whispers filling the air. Help us! Help us! Get back! I shouted, pushing my friends behind me. We need to leave now. We turned and ran, the figures closing in. I could feel their sorrow, their desperation pressing against us, tugging at my heart. As we sprinted, the whispers transformed into wails, filling my ears with despair. Help us! Help us! We reached the cabin and stumbled inside, slamming the door shut. My friends collapsed on the floor, panting, their faces pale. What was that? Sarah gasped. I don't know, but they need help, I cried, my voice shaking. They're trapped here, just like the woman said. Stop, Mark shouted, his eyes wide with fear. We can't get involved in this. But we have to, I insisted. They're lost. We can't just ignore them. I could feel the weight of their fear, but I knew we had to try. We need to go back to the clearing, face them. We can help them find peace. My friends exchanged nervous glances, but deep down I could see their determination too. Okay, Lisa finally said, standing up. Let's do it. We stepped back outside, the forest silent now, almost waiting. We made our way back to the clearing, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon us. As we entered the clearing, the apparitions materialized once again, their forms swirling in the shadows. Help us! Help us! They cried, their voices intertwining in a haunting chorus. We're here to help. I shouted, stepping forward. What do you need? The woman emerged from the crowd, her gaze focused on me. You must listen to their stories. Only then will they find peace. I turned to my friends and we began to speak, asking questions, encouraging the lost souls to share their pain. One by one, they stepped forward, revealing their stories of betrayal, despair, and loss. Each tale cut deeper, the weight of their sorrow palpable. As the last spirits shared their story, the atmosphere shifted. A warm light began to envelop the clearing, breaking through the darkness. The apparitions looked at each other, their faces softening, and one by one, they began to fade. Thank you, the woman said, her voice a gentle whisper. You have set us free. With that, the last of the spirits vanished, leaving behind a sense of peace in the air. We stood in silence, a heavy burden lifted from our hearts. We turned back toward the cabin, feeling lighter, more...
Story number 9.
It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend retreat. Just me, a few friends, and the beauty of Cedar Ridge Cabin. We were eager to escape the pressures of our final exams and revel in nature. But the moment we arrived, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and an eerie silence that seemed to swallow the sounds of our laughter. Its rustic charm faded beneath the weight of its age, with dark wooden beams and windows that appeared to watch us with an unsettling gaze. This is perfect, Jenna exclaimed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. After settling in, we decided to explore the surrounding forest. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches intertwined high above, blocking out the sun. As we wandered deeper, an uneasy sensation crept over me, as if invisible eyes were tracking our every move. Do you guys feel that? I asked, trying to mask my unease. Oh, come on, it's just a bunch of trees, said Marcus, chuckling. Jenna and Sarah nodded, but I noticed a hint of nervousness in their eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we returned to the cabin, ready to enjoy a cozy night by the fire. We lit candles, their flickering flames casting shadows that danced along the walls. But as we settled into our seats, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Let's share some ghost stories, Jenna suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I hesitated, remembering the tales I had heard about Cedar Ridge. Actually, I heard that this place is haunted. There are stories of a woman who disappeared here decades ago, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Oh, great, another horror story, Marcus groaned. But I pressed on, recounting the legend of Eliza, a young woman who had vanished one stormy night, her screams echoing through the woods. It was said that her spirit lingered, searching for something she had lost. Stop it! You're scaring me! Sarah giggled nervously, but I could see the fear etched on her face. As the night wore on, the cabin grew quieter, the only sounds the crackling fire and our hushed conversations. But just as I began to relax, I heard a faint whisper, almost like a breeze rustling through the trees outside. Help me, it seemed to say. I glanced around, but my friends were oblivious, lost in their own stories. The wind howled outside, and I felt a chill seep into my bones. Did you guys hear that? I asked, my voice trembling. Hear what? Marcus replied, rolling his eyes. Nothing, I muttered, but the unease settled back into my gut. After a while, we decided to call it a night, but sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, the whispers echoing in my mind. Help me. Around 3 a.m., I finally gave up on sleep. I slipped out of bed, trying to shake the haunting feeling. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the whisper again, more urgent this time. Help me. My heart raced as I followed the sound, feeling drawn toward the back door that led outside. The air felt thick, charged with an unspoken energy. I opened the door, the night air wrapping around me like a shroud. As I stepped outside, the whispering grew louder, urging me deeper into the woods. I knew I shouldn't go, but curiosity propelled me forward. The moon illuminated the path, and I felt a strange compulsion to follow it. I walked for what felt like an eternity, the trees closing in around me. Help me, the voice echoed, leading me to a clearing. The air was heavy with anticipation as I stepped into the moonlight. In the center of the clearing stood an old well, its stones worn and cracked. The whispering intensified, echoing from the depths of the well. Help me. Who are you? I called, feeling foolish but unable to turn back. I am Eliza, the voice responded, filled with sorrow. I am trapped. Help me. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach into the well, to pull her from the darkness. I grabbed a nearby branch, peering into the abyss. The air grew colder, and I could feel a chill creeping down my spine. What do you need? Find my locket. It holds my spirit, Eliza pleaded. I lost it the night I disappeared. Panic surged through me. Where do I look? Deep in the woods, near the old oak tree, she whispered, her voice fading as if the well were pulling her back. Just then I heard a rustling behind me and my heart raced. Guys, I called out, fear gripping me. I turned to find Marcus and Jenna standing at the edge of the clearing, their faces pale. "What are you doing out here?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. "I heard her! Eliza! She needs our help," I cried, but they exchanged worried glances. "Come on, let's get back to the cabin," Jenna said, her voice shaky. "No, we can't leave her," I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "She needs us!" "Are you crazy?" Marcus snapped. "You can't trust a ghost." But before I could respond, the whispers swelled, filling the air with anguish. "Help me, please." Okay, we'll help her," Jenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt a rush of relief as we decided to search for the locket. We hurried deeper into the woods, the trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. The atmosphere grew tense, and the whispers transformed into frantic cries. "Find me! Help me!" We finally reached the old oak tree, its gnarled roots twisting through the ground like fingers. I dropped to my knees, digging through the fallen leaves and dirt. "Where is it?" I muttered, panic rising. Suddenly Jenna screamed. "Look!" She pointed to a glimmering object half buried in the ground. My heart raced as I unearthed the locket, its surface cold and smooth. As I held it up, a soft glow emanated from the locket, illuminating the clearing. "Eliza?" I whispered, hoping it would work. "Thank you," the voice came again, filled with gratitude. "Now I can rest." The wind picked up, swirling around us as the whispers turned into a gentle sigh. The air felt lighter, and I could see Eliza's spirit forming before us, her ethereal figure bathed in moonlight. "Thank you for freeing me," she said, her voice soothing. "You've set me free." As she faded into the night, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. The weight of her sorrow lifted, leaving behind a tranquil silence. "We did it," I whispered, still clutching the locket. Marcus and Jenna exchanged astonished glances, their fear slowly giving way to relief. "Let's get back to the cabin," Marcus said, still processing what had just happened. As we made our way back, the whispers faded, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling of Eliza's gratitude, and for the first time that night, I felt truly safe. Once inside the cabin, we gathered around the fireplace, the warm glow enveloping us. I placed the locket on the mantel, a reminder of our encounter with the spirit. "Let's never speak of this again," Marcus joked, trying to lighten the mood. But we all knew we would carry the memory of that night forever. Cedar Ridge Cabin had been more than just a weekend getaway. It had been a journey into the unknown, where we had faced our fears and helped a lost soul find her way home. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I knew that the woods would forever hold the echoes of Eliza's whisper, a gentle reminder of the power of compassion and the bonds of friendship. Story the end.